to the western shores or coast of Africa. He said, when the slaves were brought on board the ship, first of all, they are shackled around their necks, they're shackled around their wrists, and they're shackled around their ankles. They are thrust into places on the ship that measures 18 inches wide and 4 feet long. When that trip is from the western coast of Africa to Jamaica, it is a 3-week-long trip. For the entire time that they are on board the ship for the trip, they are shackled. 1 hour a day they're brought on deck for air. In the hole where they are, there's excrement, there's urine, there's vomit from the slaves because of the stench, the sickness, because of the dead, the dying, the disease. On board some of the ships, it's been reported that rats actually ate through the flesh of some of those that were on board the ships. If the ship was caught in a storm, in order to lighten the load, they took the weakest and the sickest that were on board the ship and threw them overboard in order to lighten the weight of the ship. We must understand that these were not human beings. This was cargo. And what they needed to do was to get as much of the cargo to the port, to the home port, as they actually could. And if this meant sacrificing some of the others, then so be it, and that's what happened. Olaudah Equiano said that because they were chained inside of the ship, and the movement of the ship sometimes, they could not brace themselves, so many times it caused shoulders, backs, and so forth to be dislocated. When they arrived in Jamaica, when they arrived at port, in order to hide the dysentery that many of the slaves had, knotted ropes were stuffed into the anuses of the slaves so that they would appear in good shape for sale. The chains were not removed from them until they had been sold and reached the plantation. When they arrived at the plantation, the slave owner would then take a hot iron, put it in the fire, and of course then brand that slave, so that that slave would be aware that you're no longer a man and you no longer belong to God, but you belong to a man. The cages, as we see there, the black piece, it's called the barracoon. Some of them were large, they were like jail cells, like the jail cell that we have in the back, but others were makeshift cages that would be suited for animals. When they would arrive at the place where they're looking to load the slaves, they didn't always have the number of slaves that they needed to fill the ship. So they would travel inland, capture enough slaves, and then when they had enough, they would walk them back to the coast. Sometimes we're talking hundreds of miles in many months. They were in what they call coffers. That is just a group of slaves that were chained together, walking to the coast to be loaded upon ships. Some would, while waiting for those to come back to be loaded, would be kept in cages this size, given very little food and very little water to keep them alive. So by the time the slaves actually went on board the ship, they were already weak and in very poor health. So it is understandable to realize why many of them did not make the trip. to the new land. Now, there were many slave ships that went to the west coast of Africa and took slaves before the colonies